Hello everyone, I'm Devin Contrilla. Thank you for watching and following the blog. Today I'm interviewing Mr. Alan Cohen, an energy attorney at Stahl, Sewell, Shavaria, Friend, and Cohen, based out of Austin, Texas. So, Mr. Cohen, on your profile online, it says that you advise clients in the development, construction, operation, financing, acquisition, and sale of wind and solar energy storage projects throughout the U.S. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and your role in it?
Yeah, sure. So I'm traditionally I kind of started out my career back in 2001 as a real estate lawyer, and a little over 10 years ago I joined my current law firm, which had a real heavy emphasis on renewable energy and energy projects. And so if you ever drive out in West Texas, Devin, you and I are speaking here from Austin, but if you drive northwest of here, driving towards Colorado, you'll drive past a lot of wind farms and solar farms. You might see next to substations some containers, and those, you may not know what those are, but those are batteries. So we work on a lot of those projects, and as a real estate lawyer, traditionally, where I am able to help on those projects is I help my clients who are developing those projects with the real estate aspects of those projects. So it may be that we need to acquire a long-term lease to build a wind farm on land in West Texas or Southeast Texas or wherever it's going to be built. So we work on those leases, and sometimes those leases it's like a 40-year lease. And so a lot goes into that. We acquire some of the real estate rights via an easement, which is more of a limited right of use than a lease. Usually a lease gives the tenant or the lessee the exclusive right to use the property, whereas an easement contemplates that multiple people will use the property. Sometimes we help clients purchase land. And then the other thing that we do as a firm is I help with construction agreements. We have a few attorneys here who help with the permitting and regulatory aspects of energy projects in Texas. And then we end up helping with some of the financing aspects of these projects. Another thing that happens with these projects is a lot of times these projects get bought and sold. Like a project might be developed by a small developer, that might only be 3 or 4 people working on a project like this, and then they sell it to, a company that employs 1,000 people, maybe even a public company, and we sometimes have to help in that aspect, and a lot of times what we're doing, if we're representing the smaller company, we're trying to make sure that everything's in order to sell it. If we're representing the company that's buying the project, we want to make sure that everything is in order so that when we buy it, we're getting what we need to develop a project. And then oftentimes, if we're representing the buyer, we'll stay on and help them get to the point of starting construction, and then ultimately energization of the project or commercial operation of the project.
Okay. That's so interesting that you found that place in the law. It's like kind of unexpected going into law school at first. Is that what you knew you wanted to do?
Not at all. My first 10 years as an attorney, I was a litigator. I was a courtroom lawyer, and that was really probably what made me what I thought I thought that's all lawyers did when I decided in college that I wanted to go to law school. Was I just thought lawyers go into court. You see lawyers on TV, like shows like Suits or something like that. When I was a kid, it was called L.A. Law, was the real popular show, and it's generally just fighting in a courtroom, and I thought that's what I wanted to do. That's what I did for my first 10 years of practice, and then at some point I kind of shifted to more transactional work, which means I just work on agreements, and I realized I'm better suited for that. I like it better. I didn't really like being a litigator. I don't really like to fight with people. I like to be kind of on the good side of deals rather than on the bad side of deals when they go wrong. And so, no, I didn't expect to do this when I went to law school or even my first 10 years of practice. My first 10 years of practice, I didn't even know this type of practice existed. Um, yeah, so definitely it wasn't what I set out to do, but at one point in my career, I was looking for something different, and I kind of came upon this firm, and my current firm, and uh, kind of stumbled into the practice that way. But once I saw the firm and met the attorneys and learned what it was that they did, I realized immediately that this is what I wanted to do, because not only is it a good practice, and it helps me pay the bills, but I do feel like it makes a difference in the world, and most of the people that I'm working with are in it for the same reason, and that's a good thing. When I was a litigator, a lot of times people are just kind of focused on themselves, and focused on their own deal that went bad, whereas most of my clients in this space really are true believers, and really think what we're doing is important, and I like that. It makes it a more pleasant environment to work in.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do with my blog. I'm trying to raise awareness and kind of just teach people about what people like you do, and what's really going on in the world.
Well, I'm just a small piece of it, but climate change is real. I mean, we've seen it over the past 5 years. We've seen the impacts here in Austin. When I first moved to Austin in 2007, we never had extreme weather. I mean, it was hot, but that was it.
Yeah.
In the last 5 years, we've seen, even in Austin, some very weird weather events, and that's climate change at work. And so it does matter what we're doing. And then the other piece of it is, the energy industry, and this industry that I'm in is really good for the economy. I mean, it promotes manufacturing in the United States. It creates a lot of jobs in the United States. It enables people to get well. We really need the power at this point, particularly with the proliferation of data centers everywhere. Our grid is extremely strained, and so if we can provide more power to help keep the lights on, that's a good thing. If we can make power more affordable, that's a good thing. And so yeah, I mean, I think that you kind of get lost when you're just looking at a 200-page agreement and arguing over certain provisions. You kind of lose sight of what you're doing. But I do think that what we're doing has a positive impact on our community and our country and the world.
What inspired you to become a lawyer? Was it a certain moment?
So my dad is technically a lawyer. He went to law school, and he was a lawyer for about 4 years. And a lot of his friends when I was growing up were lawyers. So I think it was the way lawyers talk to each other, and sort of the things that they talk about kind of made me kind of think like a lawyer a little bit, and made me kind of want to focus on that. And pretty much once I went to college, I knew I wanted to go to law school. And I think initially, I think most people who go to law school think they want to be a courtroom lawyer, like what they see on TV, like that show Suits or something like that. And I did that for a while. I was a courtroom lawyer for 10 years. And I didn't realize during those first 10 years that there was really anything else that I could do other than be a courtroom lawyer. But once I started doing what I'll call transactional work, I realized, I like that a whole lot better. I really wasn't cut out for being a litigator, where you have to go fight with people all the time. And so what I initially thought, I guess what initially made me want to be a lawyer wound up not really being what I do now, in the sense that I don't ever go to court. I try not to fight with people too much, although we do have to fight sometimes over what we put in agreements. But now I just work on agreements. So I focus my energy on the good side of a deal rather than once a deal has gone bad, and I kind of prefer to be on this side of things. So yeah, I mean, I think a host of things kind of made me want to be a lawyer. I was always kind of interested in government and politics, and I think there's some overlap between government politics and the law for sure. So I think that also probably played a part.
What are some of the common legal obstacles that solar and wind projects face in Texas?
Sure, that's a really good question. So in Texas, the first thing I would mention that's an obstacle and that makes developing projects difficult, and it applies more in the case of solar than wind, but it's that Texas is a very oil and gas heavy state. So historically, and even to this day, Texas is very focused on energy, but with an emphasis on oil and gas. And the way oil and gas works in Texas, oftentimes you'll have somebody who owns the rights to the oil and gas that is different than the person who owns the rights to the surface of the property. And so one of the challenges that we have in developing these projects is having to deal with those people who have oil and gas rights in the property, because they may not be the same people who own the surface of the property. So when we want to go develop a project, we initially have to work with the owner of the surface of the property and get their agreement, and they're going to make a lot of money on the project. Our clients are going to pay them a lot of money to be able to build a project. But before we can get to the point of being able to build the project, certainly for solar, in some cases for wind and energy storage also, we have to get buy-in from a lot of the mineral owners, from the oil and gas owners, who if we don't get their buy-in, depending on the circumstances, might have the ability to shut down all or part of the project if they decide that they want to drill a well. And this is something you have to deal with in many states throughout the country. It's a little bit harder of an issue in Texas. So that's sort of the initial challenge, certainly for solar development in Texas, but it also comes into play for wind and energy storage, because because we're such an oil and gas heavy state, there are a lot of pipelines throughout Texas, and oftentimes you have to avoid those when you're developing a project, so you have to deal with pipeline owners. So I'd say that's one of the sort of fundamental issues. The other thing that we have to deal with in Texas from time to time, and we just sort of were focused on this because in Texas the legislature meets every 2 years, and almost every 2 years we have to worry about what the legislature might do, what new laws might be passed that could have an impact on developing the types of projects that we want to develop. So one of the reasons that there's so much development in Texas is because Texas is a low regulation state, a state that doesn't require a lot in the nature of permits to build these projects. But it seems that every legislative session we see new bills introduced at the legislature that could make it much harder to develop these projects. And a legislative session just ended a few weeks ago, and thankfully none of the bills that were proposed that would have made it more difficult to build projects in Texas passed. But that's a challenge for us every couple years. It seems that new bills get introduced, and we have to sort of wait and see whether they're going to impact our ability to build projects. So that's a big issue in Texas that we deal with. And in other states, you encounter that in other states too.
Yeah, I feel like some parts of that are obvious, like oil in Texas, and then like new policies that get brought to us, but it's kind of overlooked until people like you have to work around that in deals and trying to build a better future.
Sure. Yeah, no, I mean, that's why we get hired, and there are plenty of people who work on these projects. Like I said, any given project that gets built, there'll probably be 30 attorneys involved and 100 people from an energy company. So yeah, there's a lot of hands in every single deal that we work on.
Yeah. Are there certain policies that you think have made the biggest impact on energy expansion?
Sure. I don't know about the biggest, but just as a for instance, for a while in Texas, and it's changed a little bit in recent years, you were able to get, and you still can get these to an extent, property tax abatement agreements for these projects. And so what that means is a project might not have to pay full property taxes for a period of time from when the project starts construction, maybe for like 10 years or so. You won't have to pay the full level of property taxes, which can be a really high number, and so that helps to encourage development of these projects. That's one way that development gets encouraged. Another way is a lot of these projects qualify for tax credits at the federal level, and that encourages development of these projects. Since I've been doing this, I started doing this kind of work in 2014, and since I've been doing this, those tax credits at the federal level have always been available, but for until about 2 years ago, those tax credits, you were always kind of wondering how much longer they would be available, because they would have deadlines where they would expire after about a year or two, or they, there would be like a sunset period where, okay, we know these tax credits are available for the next year or two, but then we don't know if Congress is going to renew them. The Inflation Reduction Act, which passed a few years ago, Congress passed it when Joe Biden was president. That extended those tax credits for a long period of time, and that's good because it helps finance the projects, but also because it provides certainty for people who want to spend the money to build these projects. If you don't have certainty, if you don't know what the financial landscape will look like, it becomes harder to plan these projects and build these projects, because most of these projects, from the time that you start developing it to the point where you energize the system, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5, 6 years. And so it helps to know that those credits are going to be available for an extended period of time. So those tax credits really do help promote development of these types of projects.
Okay. So, like, one of the biggest things in this area of energy is the tax credits.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, that definitely promotes it. There are other things that can promote these development of these projects. You need to have people who want to buy the power, and throughout the country, you have a lot of communities that want to buy the power. They want to buy clean power, because they have their own sustainability goals. And then you also have big companies, Google, Amazon. They have their own sustainability goals, and they want to buy clean power. They want to buy cheap, affordable power, and renewable energy it's a cost-efficient way to provide power to your enterprise. And so the demand for the energy generated by these projects helps to encourage them as well. And so any sort of policies that promote that also encourage these projects. I mean, if you have a market for it, if you have people want to buy the energy from these projects and invest in these projects, then you'll be able to develop them. And that will probably be the case even if some of these tax credits do wind up expiring. I think there will still be a demand for a clean energy, because I think it's generally recognized now that climate change is a real thing, and we see the impacts all the time. And so I think the general consensus is that what we're doing is good for the world and the country and our local communities. And so there's going to continue to be a demand, even if some of the financial incentives associated with these projects go away. That's my view, but I can't speak for everybody else.
Yeah, I feel like I know a little bit about that, like the climate change and like how it's affecting the future, but I didn't know it went as deep into the tax credits, and there's like really so much that goes into it.
Well, yeah, I mean, the reason that the federal government or that Congress passes legislation that provides tax credits to projects like this, the end goal is to eliminate climate change. I mean, that's why they're doing it. There are different ways to get at the desired end result, and one of the ways is to promote these types of projects, and you can do that. I mean, that's how Congress promotes a lot of different things, a lot of different policies that it wants. It does it by providing economic incentives, and renewable energy is no different.
So, kind of going into the more financial side of things, um, how are the projects that your clients come to you with? How are they funded? Are they more privately funded or state funded or a mix?
They're they're all privately funded. I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've worked on one that had public funds initially. Although the tax credits are sort of a way to provide public funding, right? So if you get if you're not having to pay as much in the way of taxes, and you can and what happens with these projects is the projects earn tax credits, and then those tax credits are sold to private parties, and the private parties then put money back into the project, and that's how these projects get built. So there are usually two streams of money. Usually there's the initial investment, which is or the initial funding, which either comes from the developer itself. Some of my clients just build their own projects with their own money, or it comes from a third party lender. You know, you you might think of like a JP Morgan Chase Bank. They'll provide funding for a project like this, or any number of lenders that you've heard of will provide funding to fund the construction of a project like this. And then once the project is built, it qualifies for the tax credits. And then what you'll often have happen is you'll have an institutional investor come in and buy part of the project in exchange for those tax credits. So that's how it gets funded. I guess you could say in a way there is some public funding, and it's a sort of a combination of public and private funding. But at least at present, at least so long as we have tax credits available to help finance these projects, that's the typical structure. Now, if those tax credits go away, the structure may change a bit. But generally, at least the initial construction is going to be financed by the company itself. Some of my clients are really big companies, and they can just afford to pay $150 million to construct one of these things. Or some of them need to go to a third-party lender, and the lender will cover the construction costs, and then ultimately get paid back over the life of the project.
So for the most part, it's a mix of funding between the banks and tax credits, and then the company's money itself.
Yes, yeah. Because even if there's a loan, from a bank, the developer's generally going to have some investment that they make. It might be on the smaller end, it might be on the larger end, but they're going to have some what I'll call equity in the project in most instances.
So on the more technical side of things, how does the energy from dams and windmills and solar panels, how does the energy get distributed, and what's your role in that?
So I'm not good on the technical side. I'm not an engineer. I don't really have much of a role in that, other than that we have to help secure real estate rights to get the power from the project to the utility company. So on each of these projects, there's going to be a substation that's owned by the utility. So it could be Encore is a big utility that we see a lot. LCRA is one that we see a lot. CenterPoint is one that we see a lot. So they're going to own a substation, and we have to figure out a way to get the power to the substation via a power line. And so we'll help secure real estate rights for that power line. But once it gets to the substation, my role ends, and I don't really know what happens from there, and how, how it all gets transmitted. But the utilities kind of take it from there. Once you deliver the power to the utility, then the utility takes it from that point on. And there's not much of a role for a real estate lawyer.
Okay. So would you say that you kind of negotiate contracts?
I work on a lot of leases. Um, I work on a lot of easements. I work on a lot of purchase agreements. Um, I'll work on agreements between the project and people who hold pre-existing rights, um, related to the land. Like I mentioned, like mineral owners, oil and gas owners, pipeline owners. Um, our firm helps with what are called interconnection agreements. Those are agreements between the project company and the utility. And then we get involved also when there's a financing, when there's a lender coming in, we'll be involved in that piece. We'll be involved when there's an investor coming in who's going to acquire the tax credits and acquire an interest in the project. And sometimes we represent the lender. Sometimes we represent the investor. And I'd say more often than not, we're representing the developer, but we do work for lenders and investors also. I have a deal that's going to close either tomorrow or next week where I'm representing the lender. Um, yeah, so that's kind of what our role is.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense, and I feel like I kind of know a little bit more about what an energy attorney does now. So,
Okay.
thank you so much for talking to me today, Mr.
Yeah,
Cohen.
sure thing.
It's
Good
been
talking to you, Devin.
Thank you. It's been really interesting, and I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Nice speaking with you.